If you had told me a year ago that I would betray the one person who trusted me the most, I would have laughed. I would have said, never. Not me. I love my husband. But life doesn't work like that. Loneliness sneaks up on you. It settles in your bones, in the empty spaces of your days, in the silence that stretches just a little too long. And before you know it, you're making choices you swore you never would. I never planned for this. I never woke up one morning and decided to throw everything away. It started small. A glance that lasted too long. A conversation that felt a little too personal. A moment I could have stepped away from, but didn't. And then one day, I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. A whisper in the dark, "You won't regret this." A breath caught in my throat. A shiver I couldn't control. A phone vibrating on the nightstand, my husband's name lighting up the screen. My fingers hovering over the answer button, my heart pounding, my mind screaming, "What have I done?" I know what you're thinking. How could you? But before you judge me, before you say, I would never, just listen. Because I thought the same thing too. And yet, here I am. So let me tell you my story. And when it's over, you tell me, was I really the villain? Or was I just human? Stay until the end. Because trust me, you won't see this coming. And if you love stories that make you question everything, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. This is just the beginning. I've been married to Mark for 10 years. A whole decade of my life. On paper, we had everything, a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, careers that kept us comfortable, a daughter who was the light of our lives. To anyone looking in, we were the perfect family. But what people didn't see was the distance. Mark was always working. Early mornings, late nights, business trips that turned into whole weekends away. He provided for us, made sure we had everything we needed. Everything except him. I don't think he even realized how far away he had drifted. Or maybe he did, and it just didn't matter enough to change. Conversations turned into short exchanges. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? How was your day? I would answer, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't really listening. Most nights, I would sit on the couch while he typed away on his laptop. Sometimes, I'd try to fill the silence. Hey, remember that time we got caught in the rain on our honeymoon? He'd nod, barely looking up. So after a while, I stopped trying. And that's when the loneliness crept in. Then, there was Daniel, Mark's best friend. Daniel had been in our lives for years, long before I even met Mark. He was always around at birthdays, barbecues, Sunday football games. He was the kind of guy who lit up a room without even trying. Charming. Funny. The kind of person who made you feel like you were the only one in the world when he spoke to you. At first, I never thought much of it. He was just Daniel. He belonged in our lives, like a fixture in the background. But slowly, something changed. Maybe it was because he was always there when Mark wasn't. Maybe it was the way he actually listened, the way he'd ask me how I was and actually wait for an answer. Or maybe it was something I had been ignoring for years, but was finally starting to see. Daniel had always been kind to me, but lately, it felt different. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long when I spoke. The way his hand would brush against mine, casual, fleeting, but enough to make me notice. The way he'd say things that sounded innocent on the surface, but underneath, there was something else. Like the time we were in the kitchen after a dinner party, cleaning up while Mark sat on the couch, half asleep in front of the TV. I was drying dishes and Daniel leaned against the counter, watching me. "You know," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I don't know how Mark does it. How he doesn't see it." I frowned, glancing at him. "See what?" He held my gaze, and for a second, the air felt heavy. "How incredible you are." It was just a compliment. Just words. But something in the way he said it made my breath hitch. I laughed it off, shook my head, told him to pour himself another drink. But that night, as I lay in bed next to my sleeping husband, I kept hearing his voice. "I don't know how Mark doesn't see it." Daniel was always there. Maybe a little too much. I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he'd always find a way to sit next to me when we were all together. The way his presence filled the space Mark had left empty. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. I told myself it was nothing. That I was reading too much into it. That Daniel was just being Daniel, flirtatious, charming, harmless. But deep down, I knew better. Because when someone sees you, really sees you, after feeling invisible for so long, it's dangerous. And I was already standing too close to the edge. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when it happened. Mark, our daughter, Daniel, and I had planned a beach outing, something we hadn't done in a long time. The kind of day that should have felt easy, effortless. The kind of day that should have reminded me of all the reasons I fell in love with my husband in the first place. But it didn't. Because Mark was there, and yet he wasn't. From the moment we arrived, he was glued to his phone, fingers tapping away, face tight with concentration. Work, always work. He barely looked up as our daughter tugged at his sleeve, giggling, trying to get his attention. "Daddy, come help me build a castle." He mumbled something, distracted, barely hearing her. I watched her little shoulders slump, the spark in her eyes dim just a little. And my heart clenched, not just for her, but for me. Because I knew that feeling. That quiet, hollow ache of wanting someone's attention. And realizing you'll never get it. And then there was Daniel. He crouched down beside her, scooping up handfuls of damp sand, shaping it into towers with practiced ease. His voice was warm, animated, drawing her back in. "We can't just build a castle, sweetheart. We need a moat. You know, to keep the bad guys out." She giggled again, eyes lighting up. "What about a bridge?" "Perfect. A bridge it is." I sat back, watching them, my arms wrapped around my knees. And for a moment, I hated Mark. I hated the way he could be so close to us and yet feel miles away. I hated the way Daniel, his best friend, was more present for his daughter than he was. I hated the way I could feel something inside me shifting, twisting, pulling toward something I wasn't supposed to want. I let out a slow breath, forcing my gaze away, staring out at the waves instead. But the sound of their laughter still filled my ears. And then, as if he could feel my thoughts, Daniel looked up. Our eyes met. And it happened again, that moment, that feeling. That invisible pull between two people who shouldn't be looking at each other like that. He didn't say anything, just held my gaze for a second too long before turning back to the sand. But my heart was already beating too fast, my palms pressing against my thighs as if I could steady myself. I told myself to let it go. And I might have, if he hadn't come to me later that evening. The sun was setting, casting a golden haze over everything, when Daniel walked up beside me as I stood at the edge of the shore. "Hey," he said, voice easy, casual. "Can you help me with something later?" I turned to him, frowning slightly. "Help you with what?" His lips curved into a small, unreadable smile. "It's important." I didn't ask questions. I didn't overthink it. I just nodded and said, yes. I didn't know, in that moment, how important it would become. I didn't know it was the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to stop. But looking back now, I think a part of me already knew. And I said yes anyway. That night, Mark left again. Another urgent call. Another late meeting. Another moment that felt like proof of something I didn't want to admit, proof that work had become more important than me. Than us. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark screen of the TV, the silence pressing in around me. The house felt empty even though it wasn't. My daughter was asleep down the hall. The lights from Mark's office still glowed faintly, but he wasn't there. It was just me. Alone. And then my phone buzzed. A message. "Daniel, meet me outside. Just for a minute." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed where I was. But I didn't. I slipped on my sweater, my heart already pounding, and stepped outside into the cool night air. Daniel was leaning against his car, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked up as I walked toward him, his face unreadable, but his eyes, there was something there. Something I couldn't name. I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms over my chest, pretending I didn't feel the tension in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. I don't know. I needed to talk to someone. His voice was quieter than usual, more raw. I frowned. About what? He hesitated, then met my eyes. I've been struggling. A lump formed in my throat. I should have seen it, should have noticed that the laughter, the teasing, the easy confidence, it was a mask. Daniel. I started, but he cut me off. I see the way Mark ignores you. Silence. I felt my breath hitch. My stomach tightened. It's not fair, he said, voice lower now. You deserve more than that. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words settled between us, thick, heavy. I should have stopped him. I should have told him he was wrong, that Mark wasn't ignoring me, that everything was fine. But it wasn't. And hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel more real than ever. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky laugh. He's just busy. You know how he is. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Busy with what? A marriage shouldn't feel like this. Like you're invisible. My heart clenched. Because he was right. But this wasn't a conversation we should be having. I shook my head, forcing a smile. You've had too much to drink. I haven't had anything. I blinked. He stepped closer. Not too close. But close enough. I don't want to mess things up, he murmured. I see you, you know? I always have. The air between us felt electric. My skin tingled, my pulse raced. I told myself it was nothing. That he was just being kind. Daniel, we can't, I know. His voice was quiet. I know. And yet, neither of us moved. I could hear the crickets in the distance, the faint hum of a car passing by. I could hear the way my own breathing had turned shallow, uneven. I could feel the pull between us. A plate, a glass, the keys Mark had left on the counter. A simple touch. An accident. But I would feel it everywhere. And then the text started. Late at night, when Mark was next to me in bed, his back turned, his breathing even. My phone would buzz softly on the nightstand. Daniel, you looked beautiful today. Just that. Nothing else. I would stare at the screen, my heart hammering, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I supposed to say? Thank you? Act like it meant nothing? Ignore it? But I never ignored it. It's late. You should be sleeping. Daniel, couldn't. Thinking too much. I knew I should stop. Knew I shouldn't respond. But I always did. Because in those quiet moments, when the rest of the world was asleep, when Mark was right beside me, but felt so far away, Daniel's words made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Wanted. Mark never noticed. He was too busy. Too wrapped up in work, in numbers, in deadlines. Even when he was home, he was always somewhere else. So when Daniel showed up at my door one rainy evening, I didn't think twice before opening it. I should have. My car broke down nearby, he said, shaking the water from his hair, his clothes damp, sticking to his skin. I glanced past him at the dark street. No other cars. No flashing hazard lights. Just rain falling steadily, soaking everything. I should have told him to call a tow truck. I should have told him I couldn't help. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. He walked past me, the scent of rain and something unmistakably him filling the space between us. I closed the door, my fingers lingering on the handle a second too long. And then, silence. Charged. Electric. I turned to him, crossing my arms over my chest, as if that would stop the way my heart was pounding. I can call someone if you need, I don't need anything. His voice was quiet. Rough. I didn't want to be alone. I swallowed hard. My pulse thudded in my ears. Daniel, he took a step closer. Not too close. But close enough. Tell me to go. The words hung between us, daring me to say them. I opened my mouth. I should have said it. But I didn't. Because in that moment, standing there in the dim light of my kitchen, the rain beating against the windows, my hands shaking at my sides, I didn't want him to go. And I think he knew it. His fingers brushed mine. Barely. Just a whisper of contact. But it was enough. Enough to make me close my eyes for half a second. Enough to send a shiver down my spine. Enough to make me realize that whatever this was, whatever line we had been dancing on for weeks, we were about to cross it. I should have walked away. I should have said his name, firm, final, turned my back, and put an end to whatever was pulling us together like gravity. But I didn't. Because the truth? I didn't want to. The air between us was thick, charged, alive, holding something fragile and dangerous between its fingers. The space between us wasn't much, just inches, but it felt like an abyss. A line drawn in the sand, a boundary still unbroken, and I was standing right at the edge. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath warm, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me to stop. I should have. It would have been so easy. Just one word. Stop. But my lips didn't move. He searched my face, waiting, giving me a chance to pull away, to slam that door shut forever. I didn't. His hand reached for mine, fingers brushing, tentative at first. Testing. Giving me one last moment to turn back. I let him. A touch. Soft, barely there. But it felt like fire licking up my skin, spreading through me, igniting something deep, something I had buried for too long. I wasn't thinking about Mark. About the years we'd spent together. About our home, our life, our daughter asleep down the hall. I wasn't thinking about anything except the way Daniel was looking at me. Like I was the only thing that existed in the world. Like he had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. My breath came unsteady, shaky, as his fingers traced the inside of my wrist, as his other hand lifted, hesitated at my jaw, as if still waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. His thumb brushed against my cheek. A whisper of skin on skin. A moment. The betrayal happened. Soft. Slow. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe it didn't even matter. 1 second, we were standing there, the weight of everything pressing down on us, and the next his lips. His hands. The taste of rain still clinging to his skin. The feeling of being wanted, really wanted, wrapping itself around me like warmth after standing in the cold for too long. A soft touch turned into something irreversible. I didn't push him away. I didn't think about what this would mean when the sun rose, when reality came crashing down. I just let it happen. Because in that moment, all the loneliness, all the nights spent lying awake next to a man who never really saw me, all the stolen glances and unsaid words between Daniel and me, they all led to this. To us. To the shattering of something I could never take back. The weight of Mark's trust, of the vows I had spoken years ago, of the life I had built, it all cracked apart, slipping through my fingers, falling away like sand in the tide. And still, I didn't stop. The morning after, everything felt different. And yet, nothing had changed. The house was still the same. The walls still stood. The rain from the night before had dried up, leaving no trace of the storm. But inside me, everything was wreckage. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. My eyes were barely open when I reached for it, my body still heavy with the echoes of last night. I blinked at the screen. Mark, love you. Can't wait to be home. The words punched the air from my lungs. Love you. Did he? Did I? My fingers felt stiff, frozen above the keyboard. I should respond. Say it back. Type the words and pretend they still belong to me. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, too loud, too uneven. I set the phone down, rolled onto my back. And then, reality hit. Daniel. The night before. My skin still carried the memory of his touch, my body betraying me with the way it hummed, even as my mind screamed at me to drown it out. I turned my head. The space beside me was empty. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had all been some fevered dream, something my lonely mind had conjured up in the quiet of the night. But then I heard him. In the kitchen. Moving around like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just crossed a line we could never uncross. I forced myself up, every part of me aching, though I wasn't sure if it was from last night or from the weight of what we had done. When I stepped into the kitchen, he was standing at the counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee. He looked up, met my eyes, and smiled. Morning. Like it was just another morning. Like we were just two people having coffee in just another house. Something inside me twisted. I forced my arms around myself, hugging my own body as if I could hold myself together. Daniel. I started, but I didn't even know what I was about to say. He just sipped his coffee. Want one? Want one? A coffee. As if that was what mattered right now. I shook my head, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My heart was pounding, my stomach turning, guilt crawling up my throat like poison. You're acting like nothing happened? He finished, raising an eyebrow. He set his cup down, leaned in slightly. What do you want me to do, panic? Fall to my knees and beg for forgiveness? The sharpness in his voice stung. I swallowed hard. I don't know, but not this. Not like it was nothing. He exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't nothing. But I'm not gonna sit here and act like we didn't both want it. The truth of his words hit me square in the chest. I had wanted it. And that was the worst part. I heard the front door unlock. My breath caught. My body stiffened. Mark. I hadn't even noticed the time. Hadn't even realized how quickly the night had bled into morning, how the world kept spinning even though mine had just crashed into itself. Daniel straightened up, took a step back, his face unreadable. And then, Mark walked in. He dropped his bags by the door, his usual tired smile on his face, like he had missed me, like nothing had changed. Because for him, nothing had. Hey, babe. He walked toward me, leaning in, kissing me on the cheek. I flinched. It was small, barely noticeable, but I felt it. And for the first time since last night, I realized Daniel felt it too. His jaw tightened. His hands slid into his pockets. He turned away, reaching for his coffee like he hadn't just seen what he saw. Mark pulled back, his smile faltering just slightly. His eyes searched mine, a flicker of something in them. You okay? No, I wasn't. But I forced a smile. Forced the words out. Yeah, just tired. He nodded, brushing my hair back, his fingers grazing my skin. Get some rest today. You look like you haven't slept. I laughed, a small, broken sound. Yeah, something like that. And then, before I could stop myself, my eyes flickered toward Daniel. It lasted barely a second. A brief, stolen glance. But Mark caught it. I saw it in the way his expression changed. The way his shoulders stiffened. The way he glanced between us, confusion creeping in, something unreadable darkening his features. He didn't say anything. Not then. But I could feel it. Something was different now. Something had shifted. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't take it back. Not the night before. Not the touch. Not the choice I had made. And worst of all, not the fact that a part of me still wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I thought the worst part would be the moment itself, the betrayal, the heat of it, the point of no return. But it wasn't. The worst part was everything that came after. The silence. The way guilt clung to me, thick and inescapable, curling around my ribs, tightening every time Mark spoke to me like nothing had changed. Because for him, nothing had. But for me, everything had. I watched him over the next few days, really watched him. The way he set his briefcase down by the door, the way he rolled his sleeves up at the dinner table, the way he ruffled our daughter's hair as she giggled through mouthfuls of food. Mark, my husband. The man I had stood beside, the man I had promised myself to. And I realized something. He may have been distant. He may have been lost in his own world, in meetings and late-night calls and deadlines I couldn't compete with. But he didn't deserve this. I looked at him and felt sick. Because while I had been drowning in my loneliness, in my desperation to feel seen, I had forgotten something important. I had chosen this life. I had chosen him. And now I had ruined it. For what? I thought I knew the answer. I thought Daniel had been the answer. But now I wasn't so sure. Because Daniel was different now. At first, I expected things to stay the same. The stolen glances, the late-night texts, the tension humming just beneath the surface. But instead, there was distance. He texted less. And when he did, the words were short, clipped, missing the warmth that had once kept me up at night. When he came over, he avoided my eyes. The air between us, once so thick with something unspoken, now felt hollow. And that's when it hit me. Was it just a moment for him? A mistake? Something to be buried and forgotten? Because it didn't feel like that for me. For me, it had cracked something open, something I wasn't sure I could put back together. I kept waiting. For him to say something, to look at me like he had before, to acknowledge the weight of what we had done. But he didn't. And maybe that was the answer. Maybe I had ruined everything for nothing. The thought made me want to scream. Instead, I watched my daughter playing on the living room floor, her tiny fingers carefully stacking blocks, her eyes bright with the kind of innocence I had long since lost. She didn't know. She didn't know her mother had done something unforgivable. She didn't know I had cracked the foundation of our home with my own hands. And I prayed she never would. Because if she ever looked at me with anything other than love, I don't think I could bear it. So now, I'm left with only questions. Where do I go from here? Do I tell Mark the truth and watch our life shatter at my feet? Do I hold on to the secret and let it rot inside me? Or do I pretend? Pretend I didn't feel what I felt that night. Pretend I don't still feel it. Pretend everything is fine, even though I know deep down, nothing will ever be fine again. I don't have the answers. So if you've ever been in this position, tell me, what would you do? Loneliness is dangerous. It sneaks up on you in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words, in the long nights spent lying beside someone who feels like a stranger. It makes you do things you never thought possible. It makes you reach for hands that aren't yours to hold. It makes you chase warmth in places you never should have looked. And when the moment is over, when the dust settles, and the weight of what you've done comes crashing down, you realize something terrifying. There is no undoing it. No rewinding time. No waking up to find it was all just a bad dream. So now, I have to live with it. With the memory of Daniel's touch burned into my skin. With the knowledge that, for one reckless, desperate night, I was not the woman I promised myself I would be. And with the question that keeps me up at night, was I just a fool looking for love in the wrong place? Or was this always going to happen? Was I bound to break under the weight of loneliness? Or did I choose this? I don't know anymore. All I know is that I look at Mark. My husband, the man I swore to love, the man who still kisses my forehead before he leaves for work like nothing has changed, and I wonder, would he look at me the same if he knew? Would he still see me as his wife? Or would I become a stranger to him, the way he once felt like a stranger to me? And what would be worse? Losing him because of the truth? Or keeping him because of a lie? So tell me, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you tell the truth and watch everything fall apart? Or would you live with the secret and carry the weight of it alone? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga for more real stories you won't believe. Because trust me, this was only the beginning.